a video, we have a video library, and we have a Unity Kitchener on YouTube, as well as Unity Ottawa on YouTube. And I go there regularly just to check in on some of our old speakers. And I enjoy watching these with a cup of tea and sitting back. So perhaps you'll end up watching some Unity Ottawa, Unity Kitchener videos this week. Excuse me. So I'm going to welcome Reverend Karen Tudor and just give you a little insight into her life. So Reverend Karen has enjoyed she had a 20-year background in healthcare before becoming an ordained minister in 1994. After which she served as senior associate minister at Unity of Houston for a total of 12 years and as senior minister of Unity of New Braunfels, Texas for 13 years. Throughout her career, she also spent 1 year as a hospice chaplain and served on the boards of Unity of South Central Region and Unity Worldwide Ministries. After retirement from work in 2022, full-time work, Rev Karen is spending more time exploring art and music, travel to see old friends and family, and traveling with her husband, William, to experience more American national parks. She also spends time studying animism and shamanism with a teacher in Wales. And for Karen, life is good. So, Reverend Karen, we welcome you.
There we go. Thank you. Well, I knew that today there would be that you are looking at divine order, and that beautiful reading just encapsulated it perfectly. And I find that I'm right on target. So I'm excited to be blending with that. So today, what I thought I would look at in divine order, this is under the greater mantle of it, is this notion of God's will for us. And if you come from another Christian religious tradition, or possibly not Christian based, where, God's will is a challenge or difficult, or a path of martyrdom or sacrifice, I thought it would be interesting for us to contrast it. So I called my talk title, as you can see, God's Will or Free Will, which? And yes, I shamelessly borrowed from Dr. Emily Cady, who wrote a tract that was later compiled in her book that we use as foundational teachings in Unity, Lessons in Truth. And it is chapter 1, and she called hers Bondage or Liberty, which? And the way that she uses it, she's looking at how it is that our thoughts, our minds, our belief systems, all of that hold us captive, and that we hold the key to liberating ourselves just by changing our ideas, changing basically the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that others have told us that we still believe. And even though we think we've graduated, we've moved on, we've left home, we've gone, way has led to way, so to speak, in our lives, still we can carry in those times of uncertainty, challenge, fear, when there's a new opportunity before us and we are shrinking back, unsure of our worthiness, of our capability to face it, the challenge that should never have happened to us, we think, we find that we actually are only limited by our thoughts about it, not by anything in reality. And so we see that unchallenged and unsubstantiated stories, we see them all around us. Certainly in the States, we see it in the culture. When released into the wild, when there is unsubstantiated stories, hint, hint, there is, chaos, there is fear, and there is, I'd say an unrest, and in our case, it's polarizing. But factually unsubstantiated truth are the waters we are swimming in these days, it seems. But that's not what I want to talk about today. To your great relief. Let's talk instead about God's will. And so, like I said, we often think that God's will means sacrifice, that it's a narrow path, rigid, perfectionistic, that it's ever before us and ever all just out of reach or just unreachable at times. And then I would challenge you, if you still feel that, at your depth, that when it says God's will, oh, do God's will. I feel my response as a former Catholic, even though I've been practicing unity for well over 30 years, 35 years probably, still I shrink back and I feel like it's a heavy burden that I have to try to realize. It's an emotional reaction to think that God's will means something other than my greatest happiness. We think of it as the narrow path, rigid and perfectionistic, but I would say, have you ever taken a walk in an untended garden or through a field of wildflowers, or compared one leaf or blade of grass to another? Does that look like the work of a perfectionist to you? It sprouts up, it's beautiful, it's no two alike, no tree alike, no shape alike. Oh, it's amazing. No two clouds the same. No matter how many billions of sunsets and sunrises, no two the same. How is that achieved by a perfectionist that would demand a single pathway of rigid perfection? I just have to say, how could God's will be narrow and rigid? It must be something else. So I look at the notion of free will. Free will. I guess I think of it more like the vast field of possibilities, ways to choose, like running wild into that field, the whole wide open world. Emily Cady said it this way in her turn of the 20th century style. This does not mean that God is a stern autocrat who, by reason of supreme power, compels humans to bow to him. It is rather an expression of the order of divine law, the law of all love, of all good. Man who is at first living in the selfish animal part of oneself will grow up through various stages and by various processes to the divine or spiritual understanding wherein that one knows that he is one with the Father and wherein he is free from all suffering because he has conscious dominion over all things. Somewhere on this journey, the human consciousness or intellect comes to a place where it gladly bows to its spiritual self and confesses that this spiritual self, its Christ, is highest and is Lord. Here and forever after, not the sense of bondage, but with joyful freedom, the heart cries out, Jehovah reigneth. She quotes from Psalms 93. You see, everyone will sooner or later come to this point of experience. She's describing this natural process, this growing up, this evolution, this evolving, this awareness that to come into true spiritual adulthood, we must recognize the powers within us, that we are the deciders, that we are the ones. For me, unity is represented that kind of freedom from church rules and law, from my Catholicism that held me bound and that made me feel small and unworthy as often as it could. And from imposing God as a being with expectations of me. That self-correction is natural to relieve guilt and return to a sense of well-being. That it's up to me to discover what is the consequence of the choices I'm making, whether I like them or not, whether I find them valid or serving me in some way or not, and make a new choice, because the power started with me and returns to me. And in that, I become who I was created to be. I don't need a God to punish me or a God to fear. And I hope you don't either. In ministerial school, while wrestling with the idea of limitations on free will, or if there is any free will at all, that was a nice long walk in the dark with a friend, looking up at the stars, trying to grapple with these big concepts. I have to say, I came to the conclusion, though, that the only limits on the exercise of free will is really with my own capacity to execute my will in the world or within my own mind. Otherwise, if you think about it, if there are divine prohibitions, there can be no real freedom. And if there's no real freedom, then it's game over. In other words, I just become a pawn on a chessboard, and a big divine chessboard operating out of pre-programming of some kind. That's not a life. That's not living. That's not adulthood. That is not bringing a wild and volatile, organic, unfolding spirit into being. Because that's where the juice is, you know? Free will is essential in growing into our souls so that we can express our divine blueprint. Because without it, there is no game. And the world hungers for our own divinity, our own brand of originality, our own soul to be fully expressed in the world as long as we're breathing air. It's imperative. The world hungers for it and is incomplete without it. We must take our place. We must grow into it. We must perceive we have the freedom as well as the responsibility to do that. I believe that God's will, in fact, is finding the soul's path. If there's anything that God is constantly guiding us, divinity, source, whatever names you use, whatever concepts you have, I feel in my mind no longer connected to a being, but rather that that order is another beautiful way of saying it, that there is a movement and there is a relationship and a network of connection, of intelligence and of goodness that is ever being working together for greater good. I think it's in the Bible somewhere, just like that all things work together for greater good. God's will is the soul's path. If there is any tangible way for us to relate to it, endlessly creative, no two alike, yours, mine, others, those who've come before us, those who will follow us. We're all dependent on each other to live the life we are expected. We have been programmed, not programmed, because that sounds like no will there. Will, sacrosanct. We're limited by how much we can model our lives after mentors or teachers or another person who seems to have got it right, you know? And the internal critic that hounds us from our inside out insists that there's one right way to do it, and it's not the way we've been doing it. But the truth is, there's only one rule. And Joseph Campbell called it following your bliss. Now I understand it's called being brat. That there's a way in which we show our outrageousness, our outrageous heretical ways of thinking that would tip the can over, that would take the restrictions and the shoulds and supposed to be's that have been foisted on us, either by ourselves or by others, and throw them aside and try our own wild-haired, wild-eyed way to do something a little different. And you have to know that there's a reason, that there's no manual or map to follow. Right, parents? Your kids are busy writing their own path with their daily choices. And follow the breadcrumbs they leave to understand them better and to love them more. That's what our task is. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was introduced to a poet whose poetry finally made sense to me, that I didn't have to interpret, I could hear, and then I could feel. And for me, that poet was Robert Frost. Used natural settings, and he used them as metaphor that I could grok right then on first read. And it seemed to me now, as I think about it, how he used it, even though he was not part of the transcendental movement, he followed it and was more than likely influenced by it. But he interpreted it in 20th century, sorry, he didn't make it there. And it's called The Road Not Taken. So I'm going to invite you just to take a moment to breathe and listen. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden back. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. Way leads on to way. Our lives unfold. Bolstered by what we've done or failed to do, we've learned, and we use it as a platform to leap to the next one, to take the next understanding, to grow, to learn from mistakes or challenges or unnecessary suffering, however we've perceived it, to open ourselves instead to what wants to come through. And with each divergent path or role you choose, you're expressing your soul into new conditions and exposures and learnings and ways of being. And you yourself, you are leaving a trail, your soul's trail in the fallen leaves. which brings us back to free will versus God's will. And just to be clear, I'm not already, God has no investment in limiting our choices or controlling or narrowing the path we walk. God is neither pleased nor displeased, neither regretful or angry, neither expressing any kind of human reaction or emotion. That's all embedded in us from those who were authorities in our lives that we may still need to make peace with, give forgiveness with, and not keep foisting on ourselves. Instead, God is the open field, the open sky, the open love, the winds that blow, the water that flows, the ocean that completely lifts us and surrounds us. It is the mountain in the distance, the sun at sunset, the sun at sunrise. Every aspect of this beautiful natural world teaches us the handiwork of what is beyond our ability to reach out and touch directly, except through this human body in this beautiful natural world. That's why the earth is a sphere and not a flat plate, y'all. A flat plate would require us to turn around and go back. We'd fall off. There'd be a penalty. There would be a right way to do it and a wrong way at our own peril. Instead, it is an endless path that we will never get to the end of as long as we're breathing air. And it can be as diverse and different from the path we've trod or from the trail we've left as we choose. What better example could we have than that? So some of you are probably saying, oh, wait a minute, Karen. Say, anything goes? Is there no master plan after all? Of course there is. And you're living it. The game is actually free will itself. So it's game on. You're holding the controls. You've got the levers of the game. You've got the game control dealios. I don't know if you play games or not. That kind of thing. You're holding it. Everything you do, everything you choose, everything you defer, everything you forget about, everything you don't want to do. Everything, every moment. And there's the beauty. No matter what history you have, no matter how it's been, no matter what your patterns have been, today, right now, with a new heart, with a new idea, with a new input, with a gathered sense of strength from within, from an example that you've seen, from a word that has excited you, from the leaning that you feel in your heart, leaning forward, pressing out, saying, I could do that. We could go there. I could taste that. I could try it. I don't know if I'd be good at it. Whatever, wherever your heart, your soul is pressing you forward, where you get the zing and the excitement and the little electricity of fear, that translates into the excitement, into the energy and the power you're being given from a very, very happy, permissive, divine order to really call you forward, to take your part, to bring who you are, to unravel and to unfold your beautiful spiritual wings. I'm going to close with words that I could never have written, that I think says it to me, and I know says it to you, and I trust this is not the first time you've heard this poem either. It's called The Summer Day by Mary Oliver. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who's flung herself out of the grass, the one who's eating sugar out of my hand. Who's moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down? Who's gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes? Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What will you imagine for yourself if you're no longer limiting your dreams, your possibilities? Let go of the stories that limit you, the ones that come from your history, your background, from what others have told you that you still believe. Let them go. Bondage or liberty, which? And so, with that question, I hope you'll take in and think about it with some seriousness, with some consideration. Just take a deep breath in. And let's spend a few moments in following in within ourselves the pathway in a favorite spot on this planet, some favorite environment, atmosphere, a place that you know well, that cradles your heart, that calls your soul, from which you draw strength and respite and healing. Seaside, forest, woods, desert, hillside, mountaintop, lake, river, ocean, sharing view of the stars and the sunset and the sunrise. And take a few moments now to rest in the center of your being, in the seat of your soul, in the arms of love, in the holy light. Now, Now, a gentle breeze touches your face, lifts your hair. A bird calls out. The scent of a flower blooming somewhere. And the deep earth smell of 1,000 trees in a dark forest. The salt air rolling in with the waves. Or mountain fresh air being blown from 1,000 miles at the top of a mountain. Or the light beams from 100 sunsets, bathing you in orange and pink and purple. A return to this sacred life that we live, one step at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. How blessed are we? And so it is. Amen.